Hey, gorgeous women. Welcome to another episode of the Queendom Women Uplifting Women podcast. Today, we're talking about life after trauma with gorgeous Nidia, a fellow colleague and friend. Hi, Nidia. Welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Diana. Thank you so much for having me today. And I hope we have this lovely conversation that will help a few people. Let's hope.
I'm sure it will help a lot more than a few. Trauma is basically what we do in our work with hypnotherapy, filtered through our personal patterns and personal style as well. What would you say are some of the toughest challenges people who have recently been through trauma, or not so recently maybe, or their family members? What would you say some of the biggest challenges would be for them?
So, I've had the lived experience of that. Of course, that is how my path came to be in this incredible journey of RTT and hypnotherapy, is because when somebody's life is impacted by trauma, it's like, here's your life and you're coming along on this train track and you're looking at the scenery and you're impacted by things and you learn a few lessons. But trauma is like a head-on collision, and that head-on collision changes you forever. So those little train tracks, those little safety train tracks, are like your train is upside down and backwards and, going the wrong direction all of a sudden. And all of that stability has been essentially derailed. So life as you know it before trauma and after trauma are very, very different. The rules no longer apply. Your body that you felt safe in is now almost at odds with you. Your mind, your body, your soul are fighting different directions. You don't know where you are. So the impact is obviously not just if you're a child, the impact would be all the members that support you. Sometimes, and unfortunately, it's actually the members that are supposed to be supporting you that are causing this traumatic impact. So it's never a standalone thing, because even if you were a man or a woman as an adult standing, in your own right, it is like the knock-on effect is so varied, because just by knowing somebody who's gone through a traumatic event, it impacts you. Because of course the events that happen are not the trauma. The trauma lies in how we internalize those things, the stories we attach to those things, how we record it and make it our own. So from that perspective, it is sort of each individual person who's been touched by the trauma, on whichever levels, responsibility to then start to claw their way back into a reality that has now got to support them again. They have to lay new tracks for which to travel down. And that's where we come in as therapists, where we help them to say, okay, this is what the tracks are made from. This is how you get there. And you just kind of help them to bring all their pieces, their body, their mind, their soul, their feeling, their love, their trust. And it's just a journey to safety. So that's it in a nutshell, the journey to safety, back to safety.
I love that, and it's so true. And by the way, trauma, we know it can be anything. Okay, it doesn't have to be something that, for most people, is excruciating. And we know this when we go to scenes, to various scenes with clients. They might seem light at first sight, but I remember in the wisdom of trauma, that moment when they're calling, all the convicts, all the inmates are in the yard and they're calling people out. If they've ever been, they're in a circle. Have you ever been bullied or hit? Or have you heard any offensive language? And by the end of this, there's no one left. All of them are there. So we all go through trauma, because trauma, as you said, is basically our way of internalizing it. And what resonated with me the most from from that Wisdom of Trauma project was when Gabriel said it's not exactly what happens to the child, but it's the child being or feeling alone when this thing happens, when whatever it is, right, as the traumatic event happens to them. And it's true. I think it was in the realm of Hungry Ghosts when he mentioned that isn't the biggest damage is not actually the immediate pain, but it is the lifelong distorted perceptions, basically, right? These lifelong distortions that we bring into our interpretations of the world, of our own body. As you said, we don't feel at home in our own body anymore. And
Exactly.
that can be really crippling. And we perceive the whole world as being as unsafe. And what is worse, we perceive ourselves as being damaged. I think this is the biggest challenge sometimes. Like we think there's something wrong with us because things happened to us.
Exactly. And we know that what we perceive is our reality. So if we perceive that we
Mm-hmm.
are broken, and also the other thing that is so altering is that, for the most part, people grow up in a happy household and they have the proverbial rose-tinted glasses, and the world is so fun and
Mm-hmm.
fanciful, and you don't have too much to worry about as a child, but then all of a sudden this jolt happens and the doom glasses go on. And so it's that change in perspective. So everything is the same. Your life is exactly as it was before, except the change in perspective, that mind altering change in perspective, which of course it goes into the chemicals released in your body going into the heightened, um, you know, the negativity biased and that heightened worry that you're always looking out for bad things, looking out for someone that hurts you. And I'm glad that you mentioned children, because dependent on where in your developmental stage of your
Mm-hmm.
life, from your 0 to your 15 years of age, you have these little structures, that you're forming attachment, you're forming emotional development, you're forming how you see the world, how you see yourself. And dependent on when in that age gap you were impacted by trauma, those things can be looked at as that they will impact your life for the rest of your life unless they are resolved. And it is actually a bit of a science now, because before we had this, oh, the poor child had this happen to them at this stage, that's why they're this way. But now with our new tools that we have, is we can sort of hone in on that and
Mm-hmm.
tailor a recovery strategy, a return to base strategy that is now more sort of defined and acute and laser focused, in order to sort of like put that building block back into place, which then can heal all the other building blocks. And that's really the beauty of it. When you get therapy right, that's when it starts to bring you back to life, and you cannot just feel alive again, but you can begin to thrive. You can begin to put those little rose tinted glasses and you start seeing, wow, the sun is shining today. I feel it on my skin, and you're just bringing yourself back into this miracle, which is life, really, and I think that's where the beauty lies in healing from trauma, is that everything in nature has a cycle. We have 4 different seasons. We have a season for, putting the seeds in the ground and then watering and then tending the land and waiting patiently, and so they will blossom. But not all seeds get to blossom, because sometimes they remain stuck. And
Mm-hmm.
once you remain stuck in that trauma, it is very, very difficult to pull yourself through that and to push through the ground in order to blossom. And that's the work that we have been blessed enough to do.
I know. I know. When I wake up with messages like, I'm so glad I found you, or you've changed my life, nothing compares to that. Okay. It's confirmation that this is what I'm here for. I was thinking of some clients I worked with, and it's very interesting because as you mentioned, right, the stages of development. And it doesn't matter if we're talking from, Freud's perspective or anyone's perspective. We know there are stages of development ever since we're in the womb. So up to when, let's say, our personality is a little bit more defined, I don't think it's forever set in stone. We can always work on it. But the most damaging, and I can say that from my perspective as a teacher for over 16 years now, because I've seen it working with teenagers a lot. It's about self-identity, right? And self-image. So what I would love to say to everyone, and you don't have to be a child. It doesn't mean that trauma can't happen later in life when you're an adult, but we still act like children when that happens to us because it's somehow unavoidable. We feel lack of power and helplessness and a lot of other things. So the things that I would invite anyone who has been experiencing trauma or is a family member or a close one to someone who has recently gone through trauma. And actually, by the way, for those who have been through it, it's always recent because they're replaying it and reliving it. That's why it's important to reach out for help and break that pattern. But before that, there are some things that I would like each and every one of us to basically tell ourselves, and maybe this could be a mirror work exercise. But it's not your fault. This is the most excruciating thing for me as a clinical hypnotherapist. When I see people who feel broken and who feel like, there must be something wrong with me. Like I wasn't lovable. Um, a lot of the trauma has to be with not feeling seen, heard, understood, feeling like you matter and you're significant. When you always are under the impression that my opinion doesn't matter, what I think doesn't matter, the conclusion is obvious, I don't matter. So it's not your fault. That's the first thing that I would invite you to say to yourself in the mirror. It is not your fault, no matter what you've been through. And no, you're not broken. And you're not damaged. And as Nidia said, there's always sunshine. It's just about removing those glasses of doom, as you said, Nidia, so beautifully, and putting on other glasses. Maybe glasses that, first of all, are about self-acceptance, and then look at you through the lenses of self-compassion
And
and
also
self-forgiveness.
just to realize that we are part of a much bigger thing. We are on
Mm-hmm.
planet Earth and we are humans. And if our body can create a whole other person, that is how
Mm-hmm.
powerful and magnificent we are. In RTT, we say we have phenomenal coping skills, and reminding people that the trauma that they have gone through was a horrendous thing, and paying sort of respect to that trauma. It's not about forgetting and mind control and just getting over it. It's about having a look at these things and changing the perspective of the reach that they still have into your life. Dependent, of course, on when this happened in life and this is the difference between as an adult going through a trauma and a child going through a trauma, is a child doesn't have a fully formed version of themselves yet. They don't know who they are in the world, what they like and they dislike. They really are often still dependent on a parent body, one or two, right? So if a trauma happens to the child, it is a little bit more far reaching in that they cannot go back to being who they know because there isn't much there yet. So that has a very different way to be handled by therapists and
Mm-hmm.
therapy in itself. Whereas an adult, for instance, a mom, say you have a horrible traumatic event happen, now you have to still perform as a mother, as a wife, as a business person, all those things. So you have all this other idea of who you are. So the bounce back has more sort of pegs on which to gravitate towards. But going back to the basic of we are such powerful beings, but sometimes we can't see it. but just looking at how right down to the very cellular level, right down to that one tiny little cell that splits and splits and splits. That is how powerful we are. And just allowing us all to feel that we are more than ourselves. We are more than the person that was traumatized. And that when you peel back all those layers, there is that something, that core something that wants to grow, wants to develop, wants to heal past the pain, heal past what happened. And that is just, it's innate, it's strong, it's evolution, it is life. And being able to take the client and remind ourselves that we are more than what has happened to us gives you that little bit of spark back in your life. And all you need is that tiny little door to open before you can start to see the light and come out of it and start building yourself back up again.
I love that. I love it. It's so true. And how blessed we are that we get to open that door for them.
Absolutely.
And then it's all them, right? Because they are that powerful. Nidia, I know, like me, you had your own story with trauma. Um, if you would like to share what worked for you.
Okay. So, like many of us that come to this work, it's not been without a really big shove in the right direction from the powers that be. So, a few years ago now, I was a fashion designer, doing my thing, loving my life with the big house and the fancy car and the swimming pool and the house help and the two children and the husband and all of that. And unfortunately, through no event that we could have controlled, that all came tumbling down. My daughter suffered abuse at the hands of a very good family friend. So not only did that tear her little world apart, but it wrecked us completely. It was the obliteration of the house, the career, the life as we knew it. The next few years ensued, and we went from therapist to psychologist, psychiatrist, medication, recovery, MRI scans, and my daughter eventually landed up paralyzed in a wheelchair in hospital because her body decided that it was overwhelmed and it dissociated her whole bottom half of her body. And in that moment, I knew that life would never again be the same, but I also knew that I was going to have to be the one to save her. And not from a, oh my goodness, I'm amazing perspective, but just everything that we have tried was making her worse and worse and worse. And what was needed was a very radical, very different approach to healing. She went from being a happy, loving, singing, dancing, performing, great at school little girl to being chair wheel bound, as I just said. And something happens in those moments, and it's almost like an acceleration of life. It's like a power that happens that you go to that innate place within you, and you have two choices. You either crumble and you go back to the earth and die, or you find that force within you and you start to build. And that is what we've done. And complete life change. And I studied this RTT, hypnotherapy, and it was the only thing that properly shifted and moved that needle. Incidentally, my daughter is back in the school system. She has the use of her full body. She is not on any medication anymore. And she is starting to come back to life, starting to bloom. And so from that, my course, which I know that you're happy for me to share, has become an absolute part of me giving back to everybody else. It's called It's My Turn. It's My Turn is for the parents of children that have been touched by trauma. It's My Turn is for the children that don't know how to find their voice, their strength, their love again. And it's the proverbial putting the train back on those tracks. And this will be my life's work for the rest of my life, because that is how passionately I feel about it. It was not enough for me to have a child on medication for the rest of her life. We were talking about her having epilepsy, and she was chronically passing out every time we medicated her, and her little body could not deal with it. So I had to find a different way. It was either that, or I and her would have fallen apart, and my marriage, and my other little boy who kept getting shipped off to his grandmother because his sister was having seizures and nobody knew what to do about it. So that is how I've come to what I do today.
Thank you, Nidia, for sharing that.
Thanks,
It
Diana.
obviously brought tears to my eyes, as everyone I work with. This is what happens when you feel and you resonate and you empathize. That's amazing, and congratulations on your program. It is, right, because it's important. How do you get your life back? It is about feeling alive again, and about finding your place, first of all inside of you, and then within your family, and within the world, and not perceiving the world as being this big, unfair, dangerous place anymore. Oh.
And also the fact that trauma doesn't have to be the final destination.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is a big frustration for me, having come through this now. And, you know, it is forever. It is a progress. It's not that, you know, there's a switch on button and, you know, her life is now back to the way it was. It cannot go back there. But trauma doesn't have to be the final destination. It's about not staying stuck in that maze. It's about doing the work. There are so many excellent tools. Just keep going. And sometimes it's just one step and another step, and then you get washed all the way back down again, and you just keep going. You know, my husband and I, in order to also catch our own breath, is we often go walking on the beach. We go walking on the beach, and there's these little creatures, and they're little, I don't know if they're cockles or what they are, but they have this one little sort of almost like a foot, and they get washed up on the shore, and then they start to walk, and they make these little trails. And then soon enough, that water comes and the wave breaks, and it breaks on them and takes them off course again. And soon enough, they keep going and they keep going. And it's, why do they do that? Because that is the way God or the universe, or just, that's the way they're in existence. And that's how I see it. It doesn't matter how many times we go through these things, and you're going to get knocked down. It's almost impossible not to get that, but you don't have to stay down, is what I'm saying. Is just find that innate wisdom that the universe has for you, and just keep building, keep building, keep building. Because, you know, if all through history we can look around and people come out of concentration camps and they are amazing, they go on to write books and be on television and build incredible lives, and other people go through a bad breakup and they remain there, and that's their life, and that's a choice too. And it's not for us to judge anyone else's choices, right? And it's also not about telling people that they must move on and leave everything behind, and you've got to feel your feelings until they're no longer required to be felt. But then there are choices, and there are people who can help you.
So true. Feeling, I think this is, I remember now, I saw a post in a group I'm part of, somebody who wanted, just a very quick fix for depression, but that didn't cost money and didn't require time because she didn't have a lot of it. There was like, that's interesting. What we do is very quick, right? RTT, it replaces years of therapy.
Mm.
We've heard Marissa say it countless times, and this is how my experience has been with it, both as a client and as a hypnotherapist. But the question was like, what is your perception of yourself, and what kind of self-image do you hold, and self-esteem and self-confidence? If you don't feel like you deserve the time or the money, as you said, it's a choice, right? But what's the price that your soul ends up paying when you're not willing to invest the time and the money in your own healing? And remember, your healing is not just about you, it's about everyone around you. And I
So
don't
I
know.
was going to
Yeah.
add to that. I was going to say to you, and also the other thing is, here's my problem. You take it. Can you
Mm-hmm.
fix it? I'm not willing to put in time. I'm not willing to put in finance. I'm not willing to invest in my problem. But here you are. You take it and you fix it. And, and that's the other thing with this takeaway society is that there's nothing we can't have. If you
Mm-hmm.
want, your shopping can be delivered to your door. You don't have to watch adverts between TV shows. Everything is on demand, on demand. But doing the work with yourself cannot be outsourced. It is your own responsibility.
That's so true. It's so true. And it's about, again, it's about self worth. Um, I've heard this so many times before that when you heal yourself, you heal 7 generations behind and 7 ahead. And I love that idea. Now, even if you don't believe you can heal the past, it's definitely going to impact the future, right? Because nobody after you will have to carry that burden.
Mhm.
They'll have their own responsibility, their own things to work on, but inner work can be so rewarding. And it's like that transition from feeling clinically alive to vibrant and alive. I love this.
Vibrantly alive,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love this quote from Bob Proctor. I remember I've seen it. I read it in his book, You Were Born Rich. He
Mm.
said, many people, I'm going to paraphrase because I'm not sure I got all the wording perfectly in order, but it's something on the lines of this, like, most people are clinically alive. And when death happens, it's just a formality because they have never truly lived. How how sad is that, and how true? And I remember, oh my God, I've been in that place.
Yeah,
I
and that's
was
just
in
not
that
enough.
place.
Yes.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Before I took responsibility for my
Yeah.
own healing, um, and stopped really blaming the environment. My mom, who didn't want me, of course, she loves me and
And
she
that's
adores me
that's
now.
the
But it
key.
was really hard to know that I wasn't wanted. And
And
so,
with the trauma story that we're so
mhm,
invested in is that, we'd rather have the pain and we'd
mhm,
rather have the story of they did this to me and it's because I'm like this, it's because my parents were like that, because that story is so familiar. So there's a safety in that
mhm,
familiar truth, but the reality of, but I wish I had that. Okay, well, how did those people get there? Oh, they did the work. Oh, no, it can't be that. It must have been something else. No, no, you can improve your life and you can start to come back to yourself, but it's going to take responsibility from you. And here are the tools. I mean, it's like weight loss. We have all the tools on the internet. If you can
mhm,
go online, you can do jumping jacks and eat less food and drink more water. We all have the knowledge, but it's
mhm,
having to give up the story of, oh, it's because I'm big boned, or it's because I'm like the people in my family. It's all those stories we tell ourselves that stop us. But it's not rocket science to change your life. It's just choosing. And I know that I'm definitely generalizing. And when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to trauma, it's not just like get up and go, because the mind is
Mm-hmm.
also altered, and the chemicals, we are almost enslaved by the chemicals of the thoughts in our mind. Our mind releases chemicals every time we think a thought. So we can say, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, it's so easy, just plug in a new thought. And to some extent it does work. But we
Mm-hmm.
have to go in and resolve those traumas and give ourselves a new perspective in which to see life. Yes, this happened. Yes, it was terrible and tragic and traumatic, and you deserve all the respect around that. But now you have the lived experience. You can take that and move forward. How and one of the things that I love to include in my RTT and in my course is future pacing. People are very good at looking back and saying,
Mm-hmm.
this happened, my parents, my life, my everything, but they're not very good at looking forward and saying, well, all right, how do you want it to be? That's when you interview a client and they tell you all of the reasons why they are the way they are, they really struggle to say, but I want to go there. And in order to go there, you have to give up the story. Not that you're forgetting the story, but that you're taking the power away. You're cutting the ties to it. So you say, yes, I
Mm-hmm.
came from this. So how do you want your life perspective to become? Because life, you're going to, like you say, you are clinically alive, and therefore the
Mm-hmm.
time will pass. You will get to the end of the year. You will get, if nothing tragic happens, you will get to those things anyway, just by virtue of being clinically alive. But how
Mm-hmm.
do you want to live your life? How do you want to savor every second? Because the sand goes through that hourglass a little bit at a time, but how are you going to make it count? And in that is that switch on. It's that starting to come alive. It's the looking around and seeing what's there and stopping to smell the flowers, as they always say. Those little silly anecdotes are what brings you back to life through all your senses, not just being alive, but living. What are you seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and bringing your body back into that safety in order to
And
thrive?
interesting because everything you said, so bringing the senses is about being present, right? When you're
Mm,
thinking about what can you smell or feel or taste or see or hear around you, it's about being present in the now. That means leaving the story behind. And what I've noticed, and it's actually, I'm going to have a mastermind for our colleagues on Monday on this. And it's also one of the reasons that brought me to my own program that I'm launching in October. It's going to be a 3 month program on self confidence, the journey from feeling clinically alive to vibrant and fulfilled and enjoying better relationships and everything else. Is that, other than the fact that that story is so familiar, so it feels safe, there's a
mm,
lot of validation in it for a lot of people. Those
correct.
excuses give us a certain identity. And sometimes it can be that, oh, poor me identity. No matter what I've tried, it doesn't work. And it doesn't matter if it's about weight shedding or uh,
OCD is a
breaking
big
the
one.
pattern of toxic relationships and OCD and everything else. Right? It's because we're so attached to that identity. We're afraid of not being that because who am I when I'm not overweight? When I'm not broken, when I don't end up in narcissistic, abusive
Relationships.
relationships, and so on, that means that I have to do something different. I have to alter my identity. I cannot be the victim anymore at some point. So I think this is very empowering, right? It's okay, acknowledge the pain, feel the pain, process
Mm.
it, deal with it, see who you are with that pain, but also ask yourself, who am I without this? Am
Well,
I
this is
willing to let
it.
it go?
It's like we were saying about
Mm-hmm.
when you're a child and you've been traumatized, you actually have nothing to build yourself back up from because you don't know who you are. And so many clients, especially the OCD related things like emetophobia or retroactive jealousy, those kind of clients really struggle because they don't know who they are without the story, without the OCD, which obviously they've built that in a way to survive. It is definitely a survival mechanism. But when there is nothing there, it becomes like a secondary gain that if they give that away, there's nothing inside there. So our job then becomes how to permeate that outer exoskeleton and show them that inside of that exoskeleton, you are still a person. You are
Mm-hmm.
still a lovely human being that can thrive and that can live and can fend for themselves and that knows who they are, because that is so missing in those kinds of clients. It's if you give up the story, then what? There's nothing else. So it's
I
building
think
that
there's
something
always
else.
something. It's just that they don't know how to look for it because they're so in control mode, right? That's what OCD is. A desperate
Mm,
attempt to control everything outside because of lack of control inside. But actually, I don't think there's ever nothing. Even if the
there
trauma
isn't.
happened
It's
in your
just
first months,
in
there's
there.
always something there because we
Yeah.
have access. I mean, we have access to so much, including the unconscious collective, as Jung calls it, in which, yes, there are patterns and traumas and archetypes, but there's also a lot of innate knowledge. Because I don't know with you, but you've probably had it. I've had many clients who went to scenes when they were in the womb and they understood perfectly well what was happening. They could tell me their thoughts and everything else. And we
Mm,
know that affectivity and a lot of other things, like, I mean, emotions, they can feel in the womb if they're wanted, if there's conflict, they can feel everything. So if they have access to that in the womb, they have access to everything that's out there. It's just that it's so hard because they believe it's nothing there. I'm no one
that's
without
it.
this.
That's it. And if you perceive it, then it's the
Mm-hmm.
truth, right? It's the truth for you anyway. It's not the actual truth. But what I'm finding with the OCD, specifically OCD clients, is that need to control the environment is because they came from an environment as children that there
Mm-hmm.
was not much control. And as children, as you know, you never believe that something is wrong with your environment. You believe something's wrong with you. So in removing that exoskeleton, that hardened sort of
Mm-hmm.
control shell, inside is a quivering little child that doesn't know who they are in the world. It's like the analogy of being a crustacean in the ocean, and in order to find a new place to go and live, you have to kind of leave your hard exoskeleton behind and be a little soft shelled creature for a
Mm-hmm.
little bit. And that takes vulnerability and it takes real bravery and real strength to go find that. But you don't know what's on the other side of that. You know this, as painful and as hard as it is, you know this. You know, these clients are still living a life. They still mostly are able to hold down some sort of work. They mostly still have partners or even
Mm-hmm.
families, but it's all built around this globule of pain. So it's like going back to basics. It's like, what do you feel? What do you see? All of the things that we said, and also who are you in the world, and detach them from their value from their parents. You are not your parents. You are a whole thing by itself. You are created perfect, and then building that back up in order for them to be able to peel back the layers. But it isn't easy. Definitely not an easy switch.
It can be easy if you make the choice. Yes, it does involve
It's the
work.
choice, isn't it?
It
It's
does involve
that
collaboration with
responsibility.
us. Okay. It's not
Yes.
like any therapist of any kind of therapy can do the work by themselves. It involves
Mm,
making a commitment, choice, and decision to change. And as you said, be willing to let go of that old identity and the story and all
be
the hidden
vulnerable.
benefits. Yeah. Okay, Nidia, this has been such a pleasure. Any
Thanks.
last thoughts and messages for our listeners out there, and also where they can find you?
Okay, so you can just find me under Nidia Harris Therapy. And if you're interested in taking my course, you can DM me on Instagram directly and I'll tell you more about it. Last thoughts are do not internalize or accept that trauma is the final destination, and do not accept that you have to remain on chronic medication for depression and anxiety without giving it a good try. There are so many things, and there's so many of us, RTT and other therapists, that can help you. Trauma is not the end, it's the beginning of a new chapter.
I love this. I love this. Yeah. So I'm gonna close it with first of all, thank you, Nidia, for this amazing conversation.
Such a pleasure.
I loved it. I enjoy every bit of it. I know there's a lot of value in it. I'm gonna say again, right, for those who really need to hear this, not your fault. You're not broken, and there is life after trauma. Okay, it's not about forgetting what happened to you. It's about really dealing with it and rising above it. I remember, speaking of this, we are under the impression that if we let go of it's like it didn't happen. For example, when my father passed away, right, it was one of the most traumatic things for me. And it's when the panic attacks started. And imagine that I also had asthma and anxiety, and nobody knew about the anxiety. I haven't told a soul about the panic attacks, but imagine how difficult, how excruciating breathing, something as natural as breathing, was for me with the panic attacks and asthma. But at the same time, over time, I realized that I was afraid if I let the pain go, it meant betraying my father.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like maybe I don't love him. I will forget about him if I don't feel the pain. Cool. So it's not about that. Okay. You're not forgetting what happened to you. You're not betraying the pain, the story. It's about choosing a new story, a new life, honoring what happened to you, learning from it, healing it, alchemizing it, releasing it, and then stepping into a new version of you. Because there is life after trauma. Nidia, I wanted to say something. Cool.
Fantastic. Well done for you for getting over it. And the panic attack thing is definitely something which, until you've had one and you've seen it, you don't actually know how debilitating it is. I went through the same thing with my daughter, and it's also not a destination, because when you're in it, you think it's never going to end, but it will end. You just have to do the work.
Love this. Thank you, gorgeous women. Sending you lots of love. Till the next time we meet.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.